Hey, folks, welcome back to LettermenRow.com. I'm Jeremy Birmingham, and I'm on vacation. And I told you guys this last week on an episode of Talking Stuff, but I just miss you, and I miss talking about football and recruiting. And Austin Ward, who's joining me today in lieu of Spencer Holbrook.
Oh, I thought you said you missed me.
Oh, no. Spencer's on his own little mini vacation. And so Austin and I are going to do like a mini version of a different type of recruiting list, right? And I'm sitting in a very awkward position, and I feel slightly uncomfortable, as though my back is ajar. But it doesn't matter. What does matter is that, Austin, you know the old saying, right? Like, if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. I can't stay away. I want to stay away, but I can't.
Well, I mean, you can come back whenever you want.
I can.
I do miss you, Berm. I mean,
not
the same when we're not hanging out and talking football together. So wherever you are, Zoom brings the world closer together. Let's talk about Ohio State football.
Yeah. So today we're talking something a little different. Austin has not been on the list where Spencer and I talk about Ohio State, top targets and big time must get kids. But what we're going to talk about today is who are the guys that Ohio State had to get the most in the Ryan Day tenure so far at Ohio State, and give like a little, just a little quasi, little love to the dudes that are on the roster and who I think and Austin thinks are the 5 most important signees of the Ryan Day era. And I say signees, not commitments, because commitments don't matter until they're signees. Right?
Yes.
Right? Yeah, we're clicking on all cylinders right now.
Well, I don't know. You didn't tell me how you wanted me to format it. You want me to start at number 5?
Let's just break it down. Let's start here. Austin, what makes a signee important?
From my perspective, which is obviously more of once they get on campus, and evaluating the roster, it's a position of need. Of course, you want to fill that with the best, possible player available. But a lot of times when you and I have these conversations and you're talking about comparable players that have been through Ohio State or who they look like at the NFL level, that stuff is helpful, obviously, and informative, but you're starting over from scratch when you're a freshman. So, for instance, when I'm looking at this list, and it's going to tend to skew towards the first couple classes, I really debated hard on where to go with like TreVeyon Henderson, who he's only been through 9 practices at this point for Ohio State. He may well be the starting running back this fall, or he's in the mix for it. You've been talking about that potential on bold predictions for a while, but it's so early for that. Even though the process was unique, it wasn't on campus. It's a huge recruiting victory for Ohio State. It's easier for me to evaluate them with amount of time for what they meant moving forward. And that really does show up after 1 or 2 years on campus. So when you're evaluating in the moment, I think you have to start with the position of need, but you also can't deny that if somebody is the number 1 overall player at that spot, that's going to carry a little bit extra weight.
So did you put together a list of 5 through 1? And if so, where is TreVeyon Henderson on your list?
I went through a late revision. I was going to have TreVeyon Henderson at number 5, but in the end, that spot and the other people that I was weighing, I couldn't do it. I know how impactful it could be, but as I sit here on April 8th, as we film this, I couldn't do it. When these other 5 guys, when you know what they have the potential to do already after already being in the program for a year or two, I had to kick him out, and at number 5 wound up being Garrett Wilson instead, which if you're talking about one of the best 2 wide receivers in the country, that seems fair.
I agree. And I have a wide receiver at number 5 also on my list, but it's Julian Fleming. Garrett Wilson is a player that I think I debated. He was on my list of probably 8 names or so because he came into the Ohio State, world when Urban Meyer was there. He committed to Urban Meyer, but he was also committed to Ryan Day and Brian Hartline, who were both tag teaming his recruitment. And the fact that he didn't waver at all, I think, is probably what makes him so important in your mind, being that, he's lived in Austin, Texas.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I have another wide receiver in this mix, but um, I remember the conversations you were having with Garrett Wilson, and when I went down to Texas during this transition, like, can Texas flip him? Was there uncertainty? He was really, it seemed to me, one of the stabilizing forces. You know that better maybe than I do, but we both were around him during all of that, and uh, anyway, it was a significant turn of events there.
The reason I picked Julian Fleming instead of Garrett Wilson ultimately in that fifth spot was because Garrett Wilson was born and raised in Dublin, Ohio, and so I think that there was a little bit of it was a little bit easier to get him in that position, especially considering how bad Texas had been. So I went with Julian Fleming because he was not supposed to leave Pennsylvania. There was just no way this kid from 60 miles away from Happy Valley, he grew up a Penn State fan who'd been to Penn State 400 times in his life, at Penn State at a time when James Franklin had some actual, proof in the pudding to say, hey, we're building a program here. We need a guy like you. And Julian Fleming was like, no, thanks. I'm good. I'm going to head to your biggest rival.
That's what told me from the get-go how smart Julian Fleming was, because it is really not that hard to see through James Franklin.
But a lot of folks believe James Franklin is a really good coach. And again, for a player in Pennsylvania, and this is the point that I think is interesting, is that Julian Fleming's decision sort of like sent a everlasting ripple effect through the class of 2021. Penn State only signed one player in the state's top 10 in the class of 2021. And that is insane. Ohio State signed 2 of Pennsylvania's top 10 players in 2021. Penn State signed one player in the top 10 in their home state. For Penn State is an absolute malpractice by James Franklin and his coaching staff. But I think it started because Julian Fleming said, you know what? No, there's a difference. There's an elite and there's not. And James Franklin himself is probably responsible for that with his own comment a few years ago.
You're making me feel really smart and much better about having Julian Fleming higher in my list.
Okay. Ooh, spoiler alert. So for everyone watching and listening, I want to be very clear. Austin and I did not compare notes.
I wanted to.
As you can tell by this hastily assembled program, things were not exactly, ironed out ahead of time. Who's number 4 on your list?
Zach Harrison. A lot of what we talked about with the early importance. I mean, that recruitment was not your favorite from, working with you for a long time. Everything that went into, his ranking, the teams that were battling, and how quiet Zach Harrison was in that process, the way it went down, really to the wire. This is a spot where, that Larry Johnson needed to continue to plant that flag as a recruiter. Everything he was battling as people were, negative recruiting about him needing to retire. The transition for Ryan Day, and can he keep the wheels moving for what Urban built? A lot of the things that we just talked about from the early period, made Zach Harrison more important in my mind. And, you have to build around these defensive linemen if you're really going to build a top national contender, top defense in the country. He hasn't quite delivered on that quite yet, but there are certainly signs this spring that he's ready to become that leader and productive force for the Buckeyes at defensive end. So I have him pretty elevated here at number 4.
Trey Henderson is number 4 on my list, and this is why. Because at a time when kids couldn't make visits, at a time when the world was sort of standing still, the number 1 ranked running back in the country said, I'm going to go to a school that I've never visited and can't visit. And then not only never wavered, but helped recruit other guys, did so joining a 2-man running back class, which, most schools were using the opposite approach with him, saying, hey, you come here, you're the guy. And to me, it was an indicator of exactly how different Ohio State is right now than every other program in the country, not named Alabama or Clemson. And you aren't going to see kids making that decision to say, I'm going to commit to a place I've never been to. And at that point, obviously, he thought he was going to get to visit 2 or 3 weeks later and never got to. But it's just another one of those signs of how important Ohio State is on the national level and how big the brand is. But specifically at the running back position, after the 2020 cycle, when Bijan Robinson and Jalen Knighton had both privately committed to Ohio State and then flipped publicly within a matter of days, the Buckeyes needed a tailback like Trey Henderson to wipe and wash that taste out of their mouth. And when he committed to me, he's number 4 on my list. Who's your 3? Go, bring it to me.
Julian Fleming. You already took a lot of the explanation out of this one. I mean, but he's the number 1 player in the country, number 1 wide receiver in the country, one of the most physically advanced high school players that I've ever seen. When we went over there, and he was still, had a year of high school to go. I mean,
yeah, he's a freak.
Watch out for what's coming. That's sort of, he's one where I'm in the middle, because when we only have three classes to evaluate, it's partly on potential still, and partly what you saw, I think, in the Big Ten title game where the light was coming on. This kid has every tool imaginable. And then the fact that it was a head-to-head battle, we talked about one in the rivalry, taking him away from taking Zach Harrison away from the Wolverines. This was a death blow of sorts for James Franklin and the next closest contender in the Big Ten with Penn State. So that lasting impact, plus what he can do with Brian Hartline in this offense, has him at number 3 for me.
For me, it's C.J. Stroud. The number 3 on my list is C.J. Stroud. He committed to Ohio State when they had another quarterback committed for over a year. He was a kid who blew up on the national scene in the summer of 2019, going from an unknown commodity to a top 5 quarterback, a 5-star prospect who could have chosen Georgia, who was in desperate need of a quarterback, who could have chosen anywhere else in the country. And picked Ohio State simply because he trusted Ryan Day more than he trusted other coaches. And so when we're talking about the big picture of the Ryan Day era, the most important recruits that he's signed so far, to me, it's got to have to be the only potential starting quarterback that he's recruited in those classes. You have 3 quarterbacks in those groups between Jack Miller, C.J. Stroud, and Kyle McCord. But the fact that CJ committed to Ohio State when they already had another quarterback, when he could have stayed home, played out in the West Coast, gone to Georgia, gone anywhere in the country, to me, it's just telling that he did it solely based on the fact that he thought that Ryan Day's ability as a quarterback's coach was way better than anyone else. And so if you're looking at a guy who's, any one of those guys, McCord or Miller or Stroud, I guess, could fit into this spot. But to me, since I think that he is likely to be the starting quarterback this fall, he's the guy.
Yeah, it's hard to argue with that. I think I'm going to guess that I know who your number 1 is, and I do not have him there. Let me know. I guess I'll find out if I'm right. But I have Paris Johnson at number 2.
So do I.
Okay, wow. Okay, a bit of a surprise there for me, but that I would have. We're going to say a lot of the same things here, but this is a generational athlete. He's the fact that he's not going to be likely starting at tackle this year tells you how deep and successful Ohio State's recruiting has been. Guys that were there before him, but Nicholas Petit-Frere. I'm thinking back to when he signed and flipped, and Ryan Day and his son were watching in the living room that celebration they had. I don't think they get full credit for that one, but the fact that he and Thayer Munford are still around and keeping Paris Johnson at guard tells you how dramatically that room has changed. But this is still somebody who's going to be 3 in a first-round top 5 potential draft pick once he gets that spot at tackle. And that could still happen for him this year. There's a long way to go. We'll see what happens. We talked about that earlier this week on the practice report. But he had such an interesting competitive recruitment. The fact that Ohio State was able to win and handle any sort of adversity and deferring to the family and giving them what they want and giving them time and getting through all the transition periods with him. I thought, just watching it from my vantage point, it was one of the most impressive victories that Ryan Day could have. I don't have it number 1, but I could have easily moved it up there just based on all those things, positional need and his ability.
For me, it's about the way Ryan Day handled it, because it was the first time that we really got a glimpse of what he was going to be as not just as a recruiter, but as a steward of the Ohio State program. The Buckeyes could have played a hard ball with Paris Johnson and with his mom. He committed to Urban Meyer. He never decommitted, even though Legend Cavazos and Jake Ray at the time, both did when Urban Meyer retired and Ryan Day took over. And Ryan Day and the way that they handled that with his family to back off and say, hey, we're going to build a relationship with you, do whatever you need, take all the visits you want, just keep us in the loop, let us know how you're feeling. And he kind of just built that as like a brand new relationship. And it was just really masterfully handled by Ohio State. And obviously we can talk about the ranking, the number one ranked player in the country at his position, a top 5 prospect, a kid who is a perfect representative for Ohio State football, all the things that you can see on the field. But to me, as Ohio State fans were watching it, they should realize that that was the moment that they realized that Ryan Day was not a huge drop off from Urban Meyer on the recruiting trail. And in some ways, because of his youth, because of the way that he's able to relate to young kids a little bit different, maybe, I don't want to say better, but a different approach that is maybe more relatable to today's kids. And I think that he handled it perfectly, and it led to Paris reaffirming his commitment and becoming the leader of that 2020 class when he needed to be. And so that's why Paris Johnson is number 2 on my list. And who is number 1 for Austin Ward?
CJ Stroud. All the things that you described, 5-star talent, another quarterback being in the class, being on the other side of the country out there in Southern California, all those things you'd think would be stacked against Ryan Day, but that was the commitment, that was the signing that told you this was going to be a destination. Ohio State, Columbus, Ohio was going to be the new quarterback assembly factory, and that people all around the country would be lining up to do that. Not saying that a Quinn Ewers or a Kyle McCord doesn't happen without CJ Stroud making that move. In some ways, it'd be a lot easier for them to come to play for the Buckeyes if he wasn't around, when he could potentially be starting now for the next couple of years. And that creates its own issues. But you're seeing quarterbacks willing to just be developed for a year or 2 or 3 because of the Joe Burrow factor, because of CJ Stroud making that decision that even with 2 quarterbacks, you're going to get better, you're going to learn from this guy, his reputation, his offenses. That was a real tipping point in my mind for what that offense could become and what influence Ryan Day could have as a recruiter. This battle is not over, but as I said earlier in the week, they don't just flip a coin to decide who goes first in drills, who leads them out during warmups. CJ Stroud has done that throughout camp. All signs are pointing to him being that guy. And if you are capable of starting, capable of winning a battle against 2 other really touted recruits in Jack Miller and Kyle McCord, well, then that means that you are a potential Heisman Trophy winner, that you have the ability to lead a team to a Big Ten title in the college football playoff, that you can be a first-round draft pick, as the last 2 starters for the Buckeyes who worked with Ryan Day were. All that is within reach now for CJ Stroud. So quarterback is the most important position. This was a 5-star guy. You have to have one of them to lead your team if you're going to win a national championship. To me, that was the deciding factor.
Yeah, that's why you had him lower on your list, but Zach Harrison is number 1 on my list, because quite simply, if Ryan Day wasn't the head coach at Ohio State, Zach Harrison would be playing somewhere else. And I know that's what I'm talking about, the difference between Urban Meyer and Ryan Day and the Paris Johnson recruitment. The opportunity for Ryan Day to take over a place like Ohio State is heavy. That is a very weighted, task. And the fact that within 2 weeks of taking that job, he was able to essentially flip the best prospect in Ohio, who was going to Penn State or Michigan instead of Ohio State. If Urban Meyer had, stayed at the helm at Ohio State, to me, it set the tone for what's happened ever since. And I think that it's the reason why Ohio State fans had to know what they were getting with Ryan Day, because you had Garrett Wilson in that class of 2019. You had Harry Miller, who both decided to stick around. And those, those were 2 guys that Ryan Day was intimately involved with in their recruitment. And Zach Harrison was a player he was never involved with and had no reason to be involved with. And the fact that maybe 62-39 helped a little bit, I don't know. I mean, Ryan Day's offense was certainly making it difficult for Zach Harrison to envision himself playing at Michigan when they're getting trounced on the football field. But it really became a matter of the personality fit being so much different for today's kids than what Urban Meyer had, shown Zach and his family. And I think that as you look at the big picture of Ohio State football and its place in the Big Ten, the decision by Zach Harrison was the one that kind of gave the meet the new boss, same as the old boss feel for Michigan and Penn State, because that little glimmer of hope that, okay, now's our opportunity to maybe reposition or reshuffle the deck in this conference was quickly eradicated when Zach Harrison picked Ohio State.
There's something that you said that I think it is important to keep in mind, and it's tempting. I think you were almost going to say it, and then it would be a whole nother conversation, that Ryan Day is recruiting better than Urban Meyer ever did. And it's the same. The way that you have to look at it is that he's doing it on the shoulders of what Urban Meyer built, the same way that Urban elevated Ohio State from what Jim Tressel built. This whole program has had a remarkable run of success, and it's all been building to this level where they are at right now, where everything is fully functional, a top to bottom operation that includes the recruiting that is rolling in a way that very few schools are ever capable of doing. So if Ryan Day was having to start from scratch somewhere else, would he be recruiting at a high level? Definitely, I think so. Would he be recruiting at a level that is breaking records and really is only on that short list against Alabama for accumulating talent? Probably not, but that's also because of the guy before. So when you're comparing better or worse, Urban Meyer used to say you enhance what was already there. And I think that's Ryan Day has not messed it up. And so they're finding new ways to keep it rolling and build on top of that. That's a never ending game, but obviously the proof through these first three recruiting classes and the work that's being done for the fourth speaks that he understands a lot of what made Urban Meyer great, which is talent acquisition, and he's finding his own way to capitalize on what was there and add to it.
Yep. And that's why it's only going to get better. I mean, Ohio State is, as you said, the number one ranked class in the country for 2022. The Buckeyes have signed three pretty darn good classes under Ryan Day, but those five are the players that Austin and I think are the most important signees of the Ryan Day era at Ohio State thus far. If you have comments or thoughts of your own, please tell us who we missed. Okay. Don't tell me we missed. Suggest who you think we missed, because it doesn't mean no one's right. That's the beauty of the internet. Everyone's wrong all the time. That's Austin Ward. I'm Jeremy Birmingham. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Please rate, review, subscribe. We'll be back another time to talk about more stuff. Thanks.